Hello everyone, welcome to my video on Tac Ops. You know, they're a big part of the game. You don't really get any more points for them, but now you just choose one instead of three, and given that they're a third or potentially more if you make them your primary op, which they probably are the best primary op, given that it's a playstyle you can really cater towards your unique like game plan. I think it's more important than ever. Joining me today is Aleksa. He is the prior world champion, but some people say he's fallen off a bit since. But
I am just a washed up loser at this point, but it is what it is. What can you do? That's life.
that's the word on the street. You'll win the next one, I'm sure.
We'll give it a try.
All right. So Tac Ops, I mean, you know what they are. You get a little secret mission. There's a set of 12 different ones, and your faction will get a couple of archetypes in particular. So, we'll be running over the different ones you might or might not want to take. It kind of depends on team and on map. So here we go. Infiltration is the first one. This is kind of like a being sneaky type of shtick where you're doing something to sneak behind enemy lines or something that's not directly offensive in some regard. So the first one we got is Implant. Basically, instead of dealing damage when you shoot or fight someone, you can instead implant them with one of the attacks. So you score a victory point for doing so, and you score a victory point if the implanted enemy operative is alive at the end of the turning point. This, most of the time, is fairly terrible, although I actually do think with certain teams it's viable. I think for Chaos Cults, for instance, because you want to charge in, fight, and then maybe super reap a couple of times to get damage on other people, but probably you'll have a lot of spare attack dice, and you might just want to hide in melee. So at a time like this, maybe Implant is the move, just to hide in melee, and because there's not really another good choice. What do you think, Aleksa?
It can be. It really depends on what you're like fighting and how good or bad leaving it alive is, right? Because you generally want to be charging the biggest threat. Like if you're playing Chaos Gods, you want to like charge their Melter Gunner and kill him. You don't want to super reap and hope to kill him. You want to just kill him. So Implant always has an opportunity cost to it, which is fine, except that there's other Tac Ops that don't have an opportunity cost. Like that's really the main issue with it, is that you have to make this decision of do I kill this, and that can be really bad.
This is
That's the main
something
thing.
I think we were talking about. It really detracts from your game plan sometimes, right? And you mentioned,
Yeah,
sometimes you see people saying, "Oh, I maxed implant this game," and it's like, yeah, well, you didn't actually win because you didn't just kill their models when you had the chance.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of I lost by 3 points, but I maxed Implant, and it's like, well, if you just killed all their models, maybe we just would have won. If you took like Surveillance and scored 4, but they had no models left, right?
Yeah,
Like if you killed 3 extra models, that probably would have been better.
I think I give this Tac Op a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, it's like 4 or 5. You've got decent control over scoring it. It's just you have to do weird things to score it, and having to do weird things is not great.
All right, over to surveillance, and I'll let you take it away with this one.
So, surveillance, you have to choose an enemy operative who is a valid target for a concealed friendly operative, and your friendly operative doing it also has to be completely in enemy territory. You gain 1 VP for doing the action, and another VP if you survive till the end of the turning point. Surveillance is very much dependent on how good your team is at doing it. Some teams, like Mandrakes or Commandos, are phenomenal at surveillance. They just send one guy halfway across the board into some spot no one can reach, pop surveillance, score 2 VP, and they're chilling. Other teams, like Scouts, for example, you're like, oh god, I can't do anything with this. What other teams do you think actually do surveillance well, or are those two really just the main ones?
I think Commandos and Mandrakes are definitely really good examples of it. I can see with maybe other teams where you want to keep them on conceal a lot that it might be the move. I guess it's tough to say exactly who those would be, but yeah, the two which spring to mind are really Mandrakes and Commandos, just
You
because they
generally
have
need some sort of
yeah
mobility, yeah. I did a little bit of it with Brood Brothers, like with the little gribblies, and it's not
yeah
terrible. Like it's
I can
okay.
see that.
Um, between pervasive and insidious, you have a little bit of mobility compared to just being regular dudes walking up. You either need a lot of mobility or you need to have like spare APL. Wormblade can do some funny stuff with it as well, where you could like move the killer morph, shoot someone to death, and then switch back to conceal. No, that doesn't work anymore, does it?
I
No,
can
it
see
doesn't
that.
work anymore.
I think
Do you have to be
surveillance.
concealed when you do the action, or
Yeah,
do
I
you
think
have
you need to
to?
be concealed when you do the
No, that
action.
doesn't work. No, it doesn't
Uh,
work then. That sucks.
yeah,
You
I
can do it
can
with the charge
see.
from. If you have charge from conceal, it can work quite well as
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
actually.
Like the Jaeger blade can do it maybe.
Yep, yep.
I can see that with surveillance, it's probably the best infiltration one, right? So maybe if you feel that your team is really not good at seek and destroy, this is probably the best just like infiltration tac op to go all round, I think.
It's definitely the most reliable and does
Yeah.
the least messing with your game plan.
Speaking of messing with your game plan, wiretap. So this has a reputation of being the worst tac op in the game. Basically, for one action point, you put a token down within control range, and if an enemy operative performs an action within 2 inches of it, you gain a VP, and you gain another one if an enemy operative ends the turn on engage within 2 inches of it. So there's way too many restrictions to this, but essentially that first action uh, that you spend one to put one down, and if they perform an action within two, actually like pretty easy to score. It's also the case that if you're putting that down, you could probably just move up and shoot them anyway, or like hatchway fight them, or be within charge range or whatever. So again, it's an opportunity cost where it's like, why aren't you just playing implant and just moving and shooting them and implanting them? Which even still, implant is not always the move. But also, your opponent really has to give you that second point, really, to stay on engage near the token at the end, because you can only put down one wiretap token. And against a competent opponent, they're just not going to stick around near it if they can afford it, you know?
Giving your opponent total control of your scoring is probably the worst thing you could ever do. Like, there is just no reason you want to give your opponent this much control. And then you compare this to like Plant Beacon, which we're going to talk about later. It's the same amount of like cost to put down the token, except one you can place down like anywhere and immediately score points, while the other one requires you to go stand next to an enemy operative, make them perform an action, and hope that they don't move. It's insane.
It's cool in theory, but just really impractical, right?
Yeah, maybe it could be a free mission action. It should be a free
Yeah,
action. There you go. Or something. I don't know. It needs to be a lot
needs
better
to
to be
see
good.
changes to be viable. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Talk through
Let's
recon.
talk recon. All right. So for recon, we've got confirm kill, plant beacons, and recover items. All right. Let's start with the confirm kill first. Yes. So each time you incapacitate an enemy operative, they drop a token. If you control it at the end of a turning point, you gain 1 VP or 2 VP if the person killed had 12 or more wounds. Confirm kill is, to me, the definition of the win more tac op. If you're winning, you're gonna max confirm kill. If you're losing, you ain't gonna score damn nothing. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, just run up, kill stuff, hope that you don't die afterwards.
So I've given it like some play. I even tried it at Worlds in the one match at the end where I was already through. So I thought let's try a more unorthodox one and see how that goes. And I played it into Elites, which in my mind is the time when you probably want to be playing it a bit more because they'll drop those like crucial 2 victory point tokens. But A, you need to get that kill and you need to have them in a convenient spot for you to nab the confirm kill token. B, they need to not contest it. And C, you need to be doing this every turn. So again, it's an opportunity cost of maybe just sitting where you don't want to be because you might want your operatives to go and do something else. I did see an American guy, Sean, play this with Felgors, and I have to say that seems viable because I think your Felgors will be sitting around on the enemy operatives they've bashed to death in melee. Um,
But also, you don't die when you die.
yeah, exactly. So
So you can just pick the
Felgors
tokens up with frenzied goats,
can
right?
hold it frenzied. So I see that, but then other than Felgors, I don't think it's a great move, right?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, it's not bad. Like the thing with confirmed kill is that
It's not bad,
it
but it's
doesn't
also in
require you to.
Recon, right? Like,
Yeah, well, yeah. The problem is that what it competes with. Like if confirmed kill existed in infiltration, you'd probably pick it over the other three.
yeah,
But it's in the archetype with arguably the best tac op in the game, top three for sure. And the main thing you want in your tac ops is you want control so that you can know you'll score it, and you want it to not mess with your game plan too much.
I've just
Confirmed kill
realised
doesn't. Yeah.
we've not been rating them out of 10. Go ahead, and
Oh
then
well,
we'll go
that's
and
fine.
rate
Nah,
the others.
we can do it at the end. We can do like
Do it
a
at the
speed
end.
run at the
Okay.
end. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want it to mess with your game plan, which confirm kill only does a little bit. Like you have to go stand in a specific spot after you've killed someone, but that's relatively easy. You at least half of the time going to be within two of the person you killed, probably. But you do have to also survive, which is not something you have control over. Um, and that's the real problem with it.
Yeah.
So it's fine. It's good. Done times. Yeah.
Speaking of what it has to compete with, sorry. There we
Yep.
go. Plant beacons. So you know you love it. You've seen it probably quite a lot, but you place a token within control range outside of 6 of the other plant beacons. One has to be in your territory at least 4 inches away from your drop zone, and one has to be in your opponent's territory for 1 VP. You really have complete control over plant beacons. And last edition, I didn't really like the mission action Tac Ops where you had to spend action points for it because I felt it detracted from other stuff you're doing. The game is a little less action point heavy with less objectives, but also just the sheer reliability of this can score you 9 of the 21 available points. And that is so huge because often it's just really quite free because you have utility pieces like comms guys who aren't doing anything else, or your icon bearer and so forth, your guy who would be passing anyway, and to have these operatives be scoring you victory points feels really, really free.
Yeah, there's a few other things to it. Like yeah, like you said, there's definitely less action point things to do just because there's only three objectives. Um, I also think because of how safe and heavy the map is, there's always somewhere safe to go stand to plant your beacon on Volcus especially, and also the way it interacts with ITD and just not measuring through walls is
Or
so stupid.
yeah,
It's so silly.
the tech of being able to plant a beacon and then close a door and plant the beacon on the other
On
side.
the other side, yeah, it's okay. Sure, sure.
We were having
And
our
again,
match, and you were like, "What? Does it just explode now? You open the door?"
yeah, yeah, it should. It should. I think that would balance it out. Um, but no, and also the fact that you have primary op, the synergy between Plan Beacon of basically guaranteed +3,
Mm.
because getting 5 is like getting 6 can sometimes suck, but getting 5 almost guaranteed, which means you get 3 also on your primary op.
Yeah,
That
because
synergy
you
is
think
a
about
big part of why Beacons is so good.
okay, well, I need my primary op for this, but actually you can afford to not plant a beacon on one of the turns. You can just go, I'm going to miss it this time, and then I'll still get 5, which still pushes me into the 3 for primary op.
Exactly. And the other thing about Plant Beacon is the way it messes with the incentives for the two players if one player has it and the other one doesn't.
Mm.
If you have Plant Beacon and your opponent has almost any other tac op, you have no incentive to go across the board to fight them early on. Whereas they have to score points. If a turn two is purely passive and you're playing Plant Beacons and they're playing whatever, surveillance or something, they have to cross up across the half point of the board to score their points and you don't. And that's like so big for just like control of where you're going and what you're doing. You have total control of how you're going to score your points, whereas your opponent is forced to do something to get their points.
Yeah, like you can literally just run up to the halfway point and plant it, right? And then even just
You
move
can toss
away
it
if
over
you're,
and then
yeah,
dash back. Yeah, toss it over the line, dash back, and you're just chilling.
really good tac op. Recover items.
Recover items. So your opponent places an item on the center line and one within 2 of your territory. You then place one at least 6 away from your territory. You gain 2 VP for each that you control at the end of the game and have picked up at some point. Recover item is weird. The main issue with it is the opponent places them. I think that again, we talked about this with wiretap. Giving your opponent control of your scoring is a really bad idea. And this is the real problem with recover items because your opponent can just put them in places that are just a nightmare to reach. Um, yeah. What do you think,
Yeah.
Dan?
It's also an issue of competition, right? Like you are spending 3 action points to go and grab these items. You have to score it. And at that point, why aren't you just doing plant beacons if you're going action point heavy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is half the action points, but and the thing is, you have to pick it up before you can score points, right? So if you could score the points without picking it up at all, then that might be something. Or if you had control over all three were placed, and they just had to be like more than whatever. You get what I'm saying? You just need more control over this to make it so risky. Like because you have to run and stand on the other side of the map and be alive at the end of the game. You have to control three extra tokens at the end of the game, which means you need three extra bodies committed to doing that,
Yeah,
which can be really hard on turn 4 in a close game. Whereas with plant beacons, if you've done it, you've done it. You've scored the points already. There's no way to lose those points
I
later on in the
guess
game.
it's also that win more thing, right? Like, sure, if you're steamrolling them on the model front, but at that point, you're probably winning the game.
Yeah, you could have won with any tack up. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's something to note is that, like, oh, this is good. Aside from Tac Op tiebreaker, like, if you're doing it for primary up in a tournament or something, I think the only time you need to consider Tac Op choice is when it will actually make the difference between a win and a loss in a game. So in the case of recover items, you're probably just better off with plant beacons, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, this is the problem with confirmed kill 2 is that it's competing against the most reliable, in your control tack up in the game.
Mm,
So even if Items was pretty good, it would still be bad by virtue of what you can choose instead.
yeah. All right, security. This one, it's about sort of taking control of the battlefield. So having certain guys standing in certain places and having your opponent not standing in those places. So the first one is contain. Gain 1 victory point at the end of the turn if there are no enemy operatives within your drop zone. Within your half, and you gain a second victory point if there are none within 6 of your drop zone. So uh, basically, it's try and keep them out of your half. If you don't quite manage it, you only get 1, and if they're all the way into your half, you get nothing. This is really good for certain teams. I've got a picture of a Ratling, and they are going to be whacking razor wire and all their trip wires, and their light barricades and their mines down so that you can't reach their half. And I think contain really dictates the flow of the game. I played them a lot with Galapox when I played that, and I think this idea of, well, you can't just sit in your half, you need to come and face me, or I'll score all of my victory points. It's not even about maxing it all the time, it's just about forcing your opponent to play in this way that will stop them from winning.
Yeah, I get you. Contain does have that interesting element of your opponent might mess up their position to deny you VP. There is probably a limit to that, but I'm very torn on contain because it's giving a lot of control to your opponent to deny you VP. But you're right, it does sometimes also require them to run into Galapox to score it. At which point, or to deny it, sorry. At which point, you could argue that that is actually doing more harm to them than good. Not sure how true that is, but it is something to consider for sure. And teams like Rattlings are very good at playing it. Generally, I think Contain is really good if you out-activate your opponent because then you have a lot of control over kicking them out of your side of the board once they've done everything.
Yeah,
Especially if you're playing like Rattlings or Brood Brothers or Vanguard against like elves or something who are squishy, and you out-activate, and you kind of like, oh cool, you finished your ninth activation. You've got like one or two guys on my side of the board, and I've still got my plasma and my melter. All right, I'm going to clean you up off my side of the board, score my 2 for contain, and we're going to do it again next turn. That can work quite well, but then again, you're also still relying on your 4-up shooting, killing something. At which point, it's like, well, and I think that security does have a similar but better tac op generally, which we'll talk about in a bit. But definitely contained is an interesting choice.
It's also the case it's completely unplayable into a couple of teams. Like you would never run this against mandrakes or commandos, right?
Yep, yep, yep,
Because again, they
exactly.
have operatives that can zip all the way across the board and deny both of your points. So
And like big hordes as well, kind of just toss someone. Like you're playing as Deathcore or something, and they
yeah,
just toss one of their goons across, and you're like, oh, cool. The position hasn't been compromised by that. They don't really care.
yeah,
You're gonna kill him later, sure. All right, great, go for it, right?
it's worth the 2VP for them to lose that operative.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Right, secure center.
All right, secure center. So you score one VP if you have more APL along the center line of the board. You score another VP if you have more operatives in three of the middle. An operative cannot contest both. Secure center is weird. I kind of think it can be good, but I don't know. Have you played it much? I watched
Um,
someone play it, and I thought, oh, this doesn't seem too bad. And then I'm just not sure.
I've given it a crack. So here's the thing. I think it was very good last edition, both secure
Yes.
centerline and central control. While actually hold them back, the like predecessor to contain was pretty terrible. Um, but in this edition, I think actually committing two bodies to those points, especially the center line one. Often on Gallowdark, there's a wall in the center line, so that's
Yeah.
a lot more difficult. Or there's just no cover there.
And yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's more the maps that are messing
Yeah,
with Secure Center. I does the Galatalk version? It doesn't have the open doors count caveat like it did last edition, does it?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, that's really bad. If they bring back the old caveat where if you're on the center line on a door, you count as being on it, then that would probably be all right. I definitely think Secure Center is actually more affected by the maps than it is by its actual viability. Like if the layouts were different, um, because a lot of the terrain has the piece of heavy cover literally covering the center line,
Yeah.
and that's really bad for this tac op. If the terrain was shifted 1 inch either direction, suddenly Secure Center might actually be really good. Um,
I
so that is
guess
something interesting.
a couple of things to note. Number one is that they actually have made a ruling you can be both on the center line and wholly within your opponent's territory because it's 1 millimeter thick.
Yeah.
Um, and also, yeah, it's usually based on all of the maps. If you're securing the center, you'd probably be scoring take ground anyway. So
Well, yeah, there's that too.
it just gets overshadowed in the same archetype. So I guess it's in this uncomfortable position of just not really being viable
Yeah, I think the
anytime.
main problem is
Like,
that take ground is so much easier to score. Like the fact that you score, we'll talk about take ground in a second, but you scored two VP in take ground for controlling one stronghold,
yeah,
which is safer to do, right? It's safer to control a stronghold than stand on the center of the board
it's
most of the
not
time.
that
Depends on the
secure
map.
center is especially bad. It's just that you shouldn't ever choose it over take ground. I think. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Speaking of, take ground, you score 2 victory points for holding a Volker's stronghold, which is in your opponent's territory at all. So if it's like mostly in yours and partly in theirs, that does count. Um, you score 1 for each ruin. So, I mean, probably you'll only get 1 on that because I don't think there's any maps with 2 ruins in your opponent's territory. And then on Into the Dark,
Mm,
you score 1 for each hatchway on the center line or in your opponent's territory you control. And you score 1 victory point for each heavy terrain you control, which is in your opponent's territory on any other kill zone.
aren't those little like small ruin walls still ruins? So if you've got the big vantage ruin and then the small little ruin, those technically count, right?
Do they?
I think so. I think those are still considered ruins. Yeah.
Well, it's even better
Not
on
that it's
Vulcus then.
super. Yeah, well, yeah, it's really bonkers. I think that the fact that the ruin has it's just partially in enemy territory is really silly on some maps.
Yeah. With the ones where they're like the strongholds are both partly within an opponent territory, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's so
You're gonna
free.
control one of those like almost guaranteed. Like it's so hard for your opponent to control both,
You're gonna
and then
control
you
one
just
of
score two
those,
VP.
or you're not gonna win the game anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, yeah.
Pretty good on Into the Dark. Like often closing the door and just sitting on your side, like on guard or whatever, or actually being surging up one flank and taking it. pretty solid. You played that in our Brood Brothers versus Creep match.
Yeah,
It went pretty
yeah,
well for you. I think it was the right
yeah.
move.
I think it was probably the best Tac Op I could have picked in that. I think I scored 5 on it. 5 was. I might have been actually. Did I max it? It was 5 or 6 I scored on it.
Yeah, you definitely maxed your primary up for it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it can be very good for sure. I think that it really is a map dependent one because there are some maps if there's no Volker's stronghold in your opponent's territory, or if they're like super deep on each side, then it's kind of bad. But on most of the maps, it's pretty good. You just have to know when it's bad to not take it. In which case, you'd probably take a different archetype, or that's when maybe like center secure center can be viable. Maybe it's hard to say, but it definitely is when it's good, it's the best. Like out of
Yeah.
the security archetype.
Probably on Octarius and Bandua terrain and Nakmund and whatever, it's pretty solid. And I,
Bandua definitely. Bandua is very very heavy.
yeah. And for Volcus, sorry, Beta Decima, I've got no idea because I don't play that format.
What's a beta? What?
And I don't think anyone should either. Moving on.
All right, seek and destroy. We've got champion, overrun, and storm objectives. All right, let's see. Let's see some champions. So you choose a champion at the start of every turn as a strategic gambit, I believe. If they incapacitate an enemy operative, you score 1 VP, or if they had 12 more wounds, you get 2 VP. Or if you kill 2 7 or whatever wound operatives, you also get 2 VP. I think champion is really bad, unless you're maybe Space Marines. But even then, you pick your champion, and your opponent can shoot him, and your champion dies, and you score 0 VP. And I'm not sure what you're supposed to do at that point. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, firstly, it's actually chosen at a weird time, right? Like, revealing it in the strategic gambit phase. Often you have people going, oops, I forgot to reveal it. I would have done that guy as the champion. And it's like, well, fine, but I'm also within my rights to say, no, too late. You can't say that after everything happens. But also, yeah, it's just so dicey. And A, you kind of need to win initiative. And B, like, you might just completely whiff the roll and not get the kill. And then you lose out on your victory points. And that does not feel like it's within your control in the same way as the good Tac Ops on this list do.
Yeah.
I have had some success doing it for my finisher operative. So I played it with Jaegers, and then I put it on the guy every turn that I thought would run in and finish the kill. Because I don't think Jaegers can kill a guy like an elite in one go. So I put it on the guy that
Yeah.
would run in and finish the elite off when they only had a couple of wounds left. And that was pretty successful for me.
Yeah, it can work against elites for some teams. I mean, the real problem is that Jaegers just don't have great choices. They're kind of bad at every tack up they have.
Yeah. For some
Which is
teams with
unfortunate.
Seek and Infiltration, right? Like Nemclaw and Wormblade, I
Well,
guess.
Nemclaw can play what's it called? Not Champion, not Storm, the other one. Overrun?
Overrun.
No,
Yeah,
Nemclaw. Nemclaw really good at Overrun.
fair.
Um the other thing with the other thing with champions, if you're not playing a 3 APL team and you're not playing against Marines, it becomes even worse. Like if you're playing any guard-ish team or even elf teams, trying to get double kills can be really hard because you not only do you have to pick the person at the start of the turn. They also have to already be +1 APL'd, or you have to give them
Yeah.
+1 APL during the turn at some point, which again is adding more steps and more complications to this, and then you could charge and fail your roll and not score anything anyway.
I
It's a
did
lot of
see
steps to
I
have one dice roll determine how many points you score.
I did see Can You Roll a Crit run this one into elite versus elite matches, and he said his reasoning for it was it makes them think about whether or not they give me initiative, because I guess at the top level of the game you do see a lot of actually I don't think it's a big deal for me. I want the 2 command points. But
Well,
I
generally, if you're in a position
yeah.
where you're giving the opponent initiative, that's because there's no good aggressive play, in which case champion is even worse.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, right?
That's how I would at least think about it. Like if I'm playing, I played a bit of Nemclaw as like an elite counter play, and you'd give initiative because there's nothing they can do.
I guess it's just interesting to think about it in terms of like dictating the flow of the game in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Onto Overrun. I guess it's the new version of Rout, right? If you incapacitate an enemy operative whilst wholly within your territory, you score 1 victory point. You score another victory point if you have 3 APL worth of operatives who have scored a kill at the end of the turning point. This is built for elites, right? Like the idea that you'll be playing a non-3 APL team and they'll have both scored kills and will still be alive wholly within your opponent's territory at the end of the turn. Yeah, doesn't seem very viable, especially in the face of just run a different Tac Op.
It's all about that Jaeger warrior synergy, okay, Dan? He
I
gets to
see.
keep his 3 APL. Okay. I hate that 3 APL condition on this tac op. I wish
Mm,
it just wasn't there. I don't think that would make horde teams broken. Like, is that what we're worried about? I guess. But Overrun is decent. It can be good. Like you're pretty much guaranteed to score 1 every turn, and then keeping a Space Marine alive means you score 2.
yeah,
Seems good to me.
I mean,
Like
as you say, it's viable on Nemclaw, and then it's pretty much only elites, right?
it's pretty much only elites. Like yeah, there's the funny synergy with Jaegers that's not really there, and I guess you could +1 APL someone after they get a kill if you're playing some other seek and destroy team. It just
Yikes.
seems weird. It's so not worth it as a non-3 APL team. It's so many hoops you have to jump through that it's never worth it. And also because hordes are better at the other archetypes as well. So
Yeah.
all right, storm objectives. If you take an objective from your opponent or control their home objective, you score 1 VP. If you control such an objective at the end of the turning point, you score 2 VP, or you score your second VP.
Yeah.
I think Storm is pretty good sometimes and pretty bad sometimes. It basically comes down to a case of is this a map where you can force the issue on your opponent's home objective and make that where you like play. ITD especially, there are some maps with storm objectives is fantastic because it's like their home objective is actually harder to defend for them than the central objective, depending on how the staging is set up. And in that kind of map, storm objectives is actually pretty reliable to score 2 on. If you can just force the issue, overwhelm that point, control that room, and then suddenly you're just scoring 2 a turn, basically guaranteed every turn.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, you said to me you thought I was underrating Storm objectives, and I went back and read it again and realized, yeah, I didn't realize the bit about controlling the objective in their territory counts. So that does make it miles better. And I gave it a go with Wrecker Crew. Like I see it. I see the reason you would want to play this tac op. The ability to have a lot of pressure on that back objective, maybe on one where you really want to rush onto the objective and grab it, like I don't know, sabotage or
Yep, yep.
coordinates, is it? Right?
I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
Um,
I see it. I see that this tac op might have a place in a time. It just seems fairly solid. It doesn't seem like really powerful, right?
yeah, it's like I said. I think on the get maps where it's good, it's pretty good. Um, you just have to be able to identify when it's time to take it because if you take it on a map that's not good for it, you're gonna be like, "Oh my god, why did I do this to myself?"
Right.
I've definitely had games where I took it and I went like, "Man, I scored 2 VP and I couldn't do anything about it on my secondary. That's really bad."
Yeah. I guess that's the thing. It's also team, right? Like certain teams are fast and
Yes.
aggressive, uh, and you will run
Yeah,
onto
like
their point and get that kill.
yep, yep. If you're good at stealing objectives, like if you have APL like weird stuff,
Mm,
it can also be really good. I mean, if you think about that Brood Brother Crude game we had, if I had some objectives, I would have maxed that easy, right?
that's true. Yeah.
Um, because I just broke into that room, took complete control of it, and then you couldn't do anything about that room. It would have just been like one guy sitting there being like, "This is 3 VP a turn for me."
And I guess the idea of you just pile up on one side and skew towards that objective, you take their objective, they take your objective, and that's fine with you because you're maxing your tac op for it,
Back up
right?
for no APL cost. Essentially,
Yeah.
it's free once you've taken the room.
Okay. Interesting. Um, I guess we should go ahead and give them our out of 10 rating then.
Go
So
back to from the start. Yep.
we
All right.
started with
Infiltration.
implant, right? So yeah,
Implant. Yep.
implant. I think I gave a 4 out of 10,
I'll give it
and
a
you,
5.
yeah, 5, right?
And then going up to like a 7 or an 8 if you're one of the teams that's good at it.
Yeah. Surveillance. I actually give this like a 7 out of 10. I think for those teams that can do it, even for mandrakes, it's better than plant beacons.
Yeah, I reckon like 7 to like 8 if you're really good at it. Like if you're Grots or something.
Yeah.
Commando, sorry, if you got the Grot.
Wiretap 1.
Yeah, 1.
It's that bad. Like
It's that bad.
it needs changes to be worth, I think.
For sure.
Confirm kill. I guess like 5.
Yeah, like 5 out of 10 I think is right.
Plant beacons. I give it a 9. I don't actually think any tac op in the game is so bustedly like strong. It's a 10, but this is
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
9 out
everything
of
you want from it.
10. And then if you're one of the teams with good mission economy, it's 10. Like if you got
That
good
makes
mission economy,
sense.
it's so good.
Recover items. I give it a 3. Like opponent placing stuff is really bad. Right.
I give it a 2 because it's only slightly better than Wiretap.
Fair. And it's overshadowed by plant beacons, I guess.
Yeah, it's in the archetype where you're never taking it.
Contain 8. Like I think this has some really good play and really makes certain teams.
I reckon it's like 6 and then like an 8 on a couple of teams. I reckon that's a good way to think about it.
Skewer center. I guess I give it a 6. Like again, it's good.
Yeah,
It's just not. It's not great.
I think like on the current, I think this one has very much the potential to change depending on how maps change.
Yeah.
So if the maps change where standing on the center line is easier, then it will become better. But for now, it is basically like a 5 out of 10, I'd say. Like perfectly average, serviceable, not really great though.
Take ground. Also an 8. I think this is like a really solid tac op, especially on certain maps.
For sure, yeah. It's like just a step below beacons, basically. I'd say it's about an 8, yeah.
And then seek and destroy. Champion. I guess I give this a 4.
Yeah, I think depending on the team, I'd give it a 3 or a 4. Like if you're elites, it's probably a 4. If you're not elites, it's 3.
As I say, I've had some success with it, but it required like a lot of planning, and it was only because there were no other good options, right?
Mm.
Overrun. I guess a 5. I guess it makes sense on those elite teams that can do it, but most of the time it's fairly dreadful.
I'd give like a 7 on elites. Like I think it is really easy to score, and as elites, you can like throw smokes and stay alive and do a lot of tricks to score it, especially with counteracting and stuff. So I reckon it's actually pretty good. The main issue is it's just if you're not elite, it's basically non-existent.
Yeah, makes sense. And then storm objectives, I give a 7. I think it's just an all-around great tac op.
Yep, I agree. 7's a good place to put it.
All right, I guess that just about wraps it up. Tac ops, there you go. I'm sure you'll max them every game now after watching this video. That's
As
how it
long as you
works,
bring the
right?
right one.
Yeah, there you go. As long as it's not wiretap.
If you max wiretap, congratulations. Your
Yeah,
opponent
I'll send you a flower bouquet. Thank you very much for listening in. Thank you very much to Aleksa for being here because
No worries, it was a pleasure.
as I say, he's a bit washed, but he's got some opinions which aren't all bad.
That's true. I do have opinions.
Right. See you around.